So it's becoming more and more popular for people today to supplement with Betaine HCL to help improve digestive symptoms and malfunctions that they're dealing with. And Betaine HCL is like a supplemental form of stomach acid, HCL, like your stomach would produce when we eat food to help us acidify that food and break it down properly. And I'll put some links in the description below to some studies that kind of help us understand how effective this process can be. But I got a great question from somebody asking me, what steps do I need to take before starting HCL to increase the odds of some success? Let's jump in.
TC Hale is not a doctor and does not claim to be a doctor or licensed in any type of medical field. Don't be an idiot and use anything heard on the show as medical advice. This information should be used for educational purposes only, and you should contact your doctor for any medical advice. Now get off me.
So just remember, I'm not a doctor, so when we get into some of these topics that the medical world talks about sometimes, I don't want you to be confused and think that I'm giving you medical advice. I'm not doing that. I don't know your situation, and I don't know what's going to be best for you, because you're going to see that the best steps can really vary from person to person. So if I say something different than what your doctor's telling you to do, you really want to talk to your doctor about that. But one of the biggest steps that we like to see people do before they start supplementing with Betaine HCL, and I talk about this a lot in my books and courses, is to make sure that they're taking steps to improve bile flow. So once the stomach acidifies the food like it's supposed to, so maybe somebody's going to take some Betaine HCL with their meal to help acidify that meal so they can really break their food down correctly, and so that food isn't just sitting there rotting and fermenting and making them feel really lousy and sitting in their stomach for 6 hours. So when we're acidifying the stomach correctly, once it's acidified, it will leave and come down here into the duodenum, which is like the first 10 inches of the small intestine. So when that happens, it kicks in this triggering process that tells the gallbladder to squirt this alkaline bile down, and that helps to neutralize acids that are leaving the stomach. But it also triggers things from the pancreas to say, hey, let's put out some enzymes to help us digest, but also some bicarb to help us neutralize these acids too. So all those things can work together, and it's really important to neutralize the acids leaving the stomach, because the stomach is made to hold those acids, but this intestinal tract is not. It's not meant to hold those acids. Things need to be neutralized. So if someone doesn't have their bile flowing because this bile has become too thick and sticky to flow out of the gallbladder correctly, which is very common, then this acid is going to come out and it might not really get neutralized correctly. Then this acid is going to leave the stomach and it won't get neutralized correctly. It can start to really create some irritation in this duodenum or even into the small intestine or further down the line. Can create a lot of inflammation, maybe even a duodenal ulcer from all that irritation of the constant acid going through there without being neutralized. So just in case that's going to happen, we like to see people take steps to just make sure that they're thinning out their bile so that that bile can flow correctly. And if someone's bile is not really flowing so great, it's not very common that just starting to take HCL is really going to create a lot of trouble. But this is such a big deal that we just tell our clients, look, if you're going to use HCL, just use this supplement that we use called Beet Flow from Empirical Labs to make sure that you're thinning out your bile and make things going. So this is just what we do with our clients. If they're going to be using Betaine HCL, we like them to be using this Beet Flow to kind of make sure things are thinning out so we know it's not going to create any trouble. I'm not telling you you have to use that. I'll put a link in the description below if you want to check that out just to see the ingredients and such. We're not the manufacturers of that. This is not a promotional video. That's just what we use with our clients. But that can be the first important step that we like to see people do before they start taking HCL. Another big thing is that if a person seems to have some type of significant overgrowth, whether that's in the stomach or the small intestine, where we shouldn't have a lot of bacteria or fungal bad guys going on in there, if they're having a lot of symptoms like they're burping or bloating, or they're having reflux, or they're having like constipation and other signs that seem to come about when there's an overgrowth, then we like to see them take steps to kind of bring that down a few layers before they start the HCL. And the reason is, if there's an overgrowth here, they put out a lot of byproducts like gases and things, and those gases, if there's a lot of gas there, can create pressure that kind of pushes things back up. So now you put acid in there, but maybe it's not enough acid to really acidify that stomach the way that it should, enough to trigger this LES valve at the top of the stomach to close so that acid doesn't come back up. That gets kind of triggered by stomach acid. So if someone just puts a little bit of acid in there, most people just start with 1 or 2 capsules of HCL when they're first starting to supplement. So if they put that in there when there's all this gas from an overgrowth, it's going to push that acid right back up and give them crazy reflux and make them cuss. So we like to see them take steps to at least create a reduction in that overgrowth. They don't usually need to totally wipe it out before they start taking HCL, but you want to see them at least reduce it a little bit. And we have a lot of videos about reducing overgrowth and taking steps like mastic gum and D-limonene and other antimicrobials that are natural. So we just have them take at least some type of step there before they start testing out the HCL to reduce the odds of a lot of gas pushing things back up and creating some type of magnification of symptoms. Even if they don't get reflux, if there's a lot of bacteria in the stomach and it's putting out all this alkaline byproducts and such, then you put this acid in there with all this alkaline byproduct and it's going to create this fizzy mess that can really like magnify bloating symptoms or just make a person feel really lousy. So this can be an important one. Just reduce some type of overgrowth going on so that you don't magnify these acid reflux symptoms or create acid reflux symptoms. A lot of people never feel reflux because they're not making any stomach acid, or there's some type of overgrowth that's really alkalizing everything, so they have basically no acid there. I mean, they're getting reflux, things are probably coming back up, but they don't get burned and they don't feel it because there's no acid. So this is why we like to see people take steps to reduce any overgrowth if one appears to be going on before they start putting acid in, so they're not like putting it in like, oh, that didn't work, that gave me reflux, HCL is not for me. But the reality was they just needed more HCL and to reduce an overgrowth enough so that they could acidify that stomach enough to trigger that valve to close. Now another possibility is that if a person has gastritis or ulcers in their stomach or even in their duodenum, that they really want to correct that issue before they start to supplement with Betaine HCL. And gastritis is just like inflammation in the stomach, and if that lining in the stomach is really inflamed, putting acid in there is really going to burn. It's going to create a lot of discomfort. If somebody has an ulcer in the stomach that's like an open wound, then putting acid on that is going to be very uncomfortable. It can create some significant pain. So someone would not want to put Betaine HCL in their stomach if they were dealing with an issue like that. The interesting thing is that in most cases, people are dealing with gastritis or ulcers because of some type of bacterial overgrowth that got into the stomach, because there was not enough stomach acid. When the person is not making enough stomach acid, which is very common for a wide variety of reasons, now that stomach is not being acidified, so when these bad guys come in on the food that we're eating, they just set up camp and have a party and a great time. That stomach acid is like the barrier to the whole body that keeps these bad guys from coming in and moving down here into the small intestine and creating all kinds of havoc. So even though it's very common that a lack of stomach acid would allow this gastritis or ulcer issue to come about and develop, the answer is not always just putting acid in there. Usually a person needs to take steps to allow this to heal a little bit, and then they can try to acidify the stomach correctly. We'll put a link in the description below for our video on gastritis, a different viewpoint, and our video about ulcers, so you can dig into that if that's a situation for you. If a person's not sure and they're like, oh, I'm going to start supplementing with Betaine HCL, and they put some HCL in the stomach and then it's like feeling like fire, burning, crazy pain, then they know, okay, there's probably some inflammation in there. Then they could take like a little bit of baking soda and some water to kind of neutralize those acids and know that it's not time for them to supplement with Betaine HCL yet. They still have work to correct some issues before they can do that. But this is really not that common that I would see that or hear from people who just tested out HCL and they found that it was burning and, oh, I must have gastritis. It's just not as common as you might think, but still something that a person needs to be aware of. And a person needs to understand, if I have gastritis, I have to create improvements there before it's time for me to acidify my stomach. Another issue is if a person is dealing with loose stools, we don't like to see them start to supplement with Betaine HCL until they take steps to improve that issue. And we have a lot of videos about diarrhea. I'll put our video on how to improve chronic diarrhea in the description below this video. But in a lot of cases, it's about a lack of bile flow. And so this acid leaving the stomach is not getting neutralized correctly. So it continues to move through the intestinal tract and is creating a lot of irritation because acid doesn't belong down there in that small intestine or large intestine area. So the body tries to rush it out the back door and bring all the water it can to cool it down, and then the person gets crazy diarrhea. So there's other causes of diarrhea like infections and things like that. But in most cases, when things are moving too fast, you don't want to put more acid in there because it could just speed things up and make it worse. Now, there is a scenario where a chronic diarrhea issue can be caused by an over-alkaline situation. Over-alkalinity can create inflammation as well. It's just a little bit more rare to see that. So we like to see people try to correct the diarrhea before starting the HCL, and that will reduce the odds of really magnifying that diarrhea problem. But we'll put a link in the description below for our video on bile acid diarrhea in case you're one of those rare people that the diarrhea is being caused by being over alkaline, and when they put in HCL and acidify the stomach, it slows down the stool correctly. It's more rare. It's not the first step you want to test out, but we'll make that video available to you. And another thing to consider is like an H. pylori infection. And you'll hear from a lot of people that'll tell you if you have an H. pylori infection, don't supplement with Betaine HCL. And I don't hold that viewpoint. I'll help you understand why they have this viewpoint and then tell you why I don't agree with it. But a lot of people kind of feel like, well, H. pylori doesn't like an acidic environment. So if you put this Betaine HCL in there, you're going to acidify things and it's going to make them to kind of bury deeper into that lining in the stomach and hide away, and then you can't kill them with the antimicrobials or whatever you're using to try and kill them off. So that's one viewpoint to have. Other people feel like, well, H. pylori can create energy with hydrogen. And hydrogen is one of the things that the body uses to make hydrochloric acid or HCl. So when you put this Betaine HCL in there, a lot of people feel like, well, this is going to break down into hydrogen and make hydrogen available to the H. pylori, and you're just going to give them a buffet that allows them to grow wild and go crazy. But one thing to think about is that if a person has an H. pylori infection, they shouldn't be only using Betaine HCL. You need to take something that's going to help reduce that overgrowth a little bit. Just acidifying the stomach and making the stomach an environment that is not susceptible for them to thrive is not enough to get rid of them. A person should be using antimicrobials to wipe them out. So even if this Betaine HCL was providing a fuel source for them, doesn't mean that they're going to thrive when you put it in there. You should be taking other steps to reduce that overgrowth as well. And if someone's just using Betaine HCL while they have an H. pylori infection, it's absolutely possible for that overgrowth to really get magnified just because they're not taking steps to bring that reduction down. And anytime you're not taking steps to reduce an overgrowth, their goal is to really magnify. That's what they're trying to do. So it makes sense that an overgrowth could magnify if a person was just acidifying their stomach and not taking steps to reduce that overgrowth. I just don't view this supplemental form of Betaine HCL as a fuel source for H. pylori because it's in a processed form. It's not like the body would kind of make hydrogen to create this HCl. And I do feel like reducing that hydrogen is one way that the medical world takes steps to kind of try and starve the H. pylori out. They put a lot of people on these PPIs to kind of turn off that stomach acid and remove that hydrogen aspect, and then it has the ability to reduce whatever's going on for the H. pylori. So when somebody's doing that, I'm like, it's okay. If they have H. pylori, they're not really acidifying their stomach in most cases anyways because of the byproduct that the H. pylori puts out to kind of alkalize that environment and make it more hospitable for them to thrive and such. So that's one viewpoint, but we see that just doing that is usually not enough to wipe out the H. pylori. So we have to look at other things, and we have to consider that in most cases, a person is not dealing with a single infection. They don't have just H. pylori. They have all of these other things that come in too. When one varmint comes in and kind of sets up camp, it sets up the environment so others can thrive as well. So most people are almost always dealing with more than just H. pylori. So something that we have to think about is that other bacteria have the ability to create hydrogen. So allowing other bacteria to come in the front door and set up camp and create this hydrogen gives the H. pylori a fuel source anyways. I'll put a link to a study below where you can dig into this a little bit better if you want to. But what we like to do is not just throw HCl in there when someone has an H. pylori infection, like we talked about. We want to reduce that at least a few layers so that the reaction is not going to be so significant. If we're reducing that quite a few layers and then we start to supplement with Betaine HCL, well, now we're not only helping the person digest their food better so that they can break it down and get more nutrients out of that food that the body can then use to allow the immune system to function properly and help get rid of this invader, but we're also relieving some symptoms that the person is dealing with from all the things that come about from a lack of stomach acid. There's a wide variety of symptoms that come about when someone's not making enough stomach acid. So when they can start acidifying that correctly, well, now they're really going to improve a lot of that scenario. But the biggest thing in my eyes is that if they can acidify the stomach correctly, now they're closing the front door. Now, while they're trying to get rid of this infection, they're not leaving the door open for more bad guys to just come in and set up camp and create this perpetual situation that never seems to end. So we really like to close the door. And if you're afraid of H. pylori, like burrowing down into that stomach lining more when you make things acidic, then you really should be taking your antimicrobial steps away from food anyways. You shouldn't be taking those while you're acidifying the stomach. When people use things like mastic gum or other antimicrobials, they usually do that away from food. So though I do fit H. pylori into this category up here, where if somebody has an overgrowth, they really want to reduce that for 3, 4, 14 days, depending on how significant it is, before they start supplementing with the HCl. But I don't view it like as long as somebody has H. pylori, they shouldn't be using Betaine HCl. If that were the case, then every human and every animal that had their digestion working correctly would have a significant H. pylori overgrowth. Because working correctly means that that hydrogen is making hydrochloric acid, and that must feed the H. pylori. So sometimes when we're looking at these things, we have to at least invite in common sense to kind of get a better viewpoint of the whole picture. But beyond understanding some steps that can help before you start supplementing with HCl, it's also important to understand that for some people, it can really magnify some symptoms when they first start. And if you understand what you're looking at and what your body's telling you, it's not just saying you don't need to acidify your stomach. In some cases, it's saying you need to improve some situations before that's going to relieve those symptoms by acidifying the stomach. So right now, if you want to understand those things a little bit better, you can jump over and check out our video on possible symptoms that can show up when first starting Betaine HCl. I can't wait to hear about your results.